Picture a dinner party. 8 people around a table, someone in the middle of a story, arms wide, voice rising, about something that happened at the airport. Everyone's leaning in. Everyone's laughing. And then there's one person at the end of the table who has barely spoken all night. They're not on their phone. They're not bored. They're watching the storyteller with this quiet, almost still attention, taking in the way he gestures, the way the woman across from him laughs a half second before anyone else, the small flicker of tension between the couple sitting side by side who haven't quite made eye contact all evening. Nobody notices the quiet one, or if they do, they tell themselves a story about them. He's shy. She thinks she's better than us. He must be having a terrible time. Maybe someone will corner them later and say, with the best intentions, "You're so quiet. Are you okay?" As if silence were a symptom, as if something must be wrong. But here's what I keep coming back to. What if that instinct is wrong? What if the quiet person at the end of the table isn't absent from the room, but more present in it than anyone else? What if the psychology underneath that stillness is not emptiness, but density? The people who don't like to talk a lot are not simply people who have less to say. They are very often people who experience the world at a different register entirely. And understanding what that actually looks like on the inside changes everything about how you see them from the outside. The thing people get most wrong about quiet people is the small talk. Most assume it means they're antisocial or arrogant, or just haven't found the right opener yet. But that's not what's happening. For people who default to silence, small talk doesn't feel neutral. It feels effortful in a specific and almost physical way. Someone asks, "How was your weekend?" And the quiet person is, almost involuntarily, registering the slight tiredness in their voice, wondering if the question was genuine or reflexive, trying to figure out what kind of answer is actually being invited here. They're not overthinking it so much as they're fully thinking it. And by the time they've thought it, the conversational moment has already moved on. They didn't miss it. They just couldn't arrive in time. This isn't a social skill deficit. It's the way they think. And here's what's fascinating about that. For people who talk easily and often, talking is thinking. The words come out rough and get refined in the air. It's live, collaborative, external. But for quieter people, there's an entire interior process that happens first. And the words, if they come at all, arrive at the end of that process, not the beginning. Which means when a quiet person finally says something, it's usually not the start of a thought. It's the conclusion of one that's been running for a while. And this is the part I keep coming back to. The inner life that runs alongside that outer silence is not a muted version of a more social person's inner life. It's often louder, more textured. There's an ongoing internal monologue, not anxious necessarily, just running, that processes experience in real time in ways that never quite find their way into speech. This is why quiet people can often recall conversations from years ago with startling precision, or notice things about a room that nobody else caught. The couple at that dinner table who haven't made eye contact all evening. The quiet person clocked that in the first 10 minutes. They saw it. They carried it quietly. And they never said a word, because nobody asked. The attention that other people spend partly on performing social presence goes inward and outward onto the world, and nowhere in between. There's a particular quality to how quiet people listen, and it's worth dwelling on, because it's one of the most misunderstood things about them. When a quiet person is truly listening to you, it can feel a little unnerving. They're not nodding along on a timer. They're not filling the pauses with reassuring sounds. They're just receiving, taking it in completely. And because we're so trained to equate engagement with verbal output, that kind of listening can read as indifference when it's actually the opposite. It's the most complete form of attention most people will ever receive from another person. It's just quiet. The preference for one-on-one conversations over groups makes perfect sense once you understand this. Groups diffuse signal. There's too much surface, too many competing registers, too many moments where you'd have to insert yourself loudly just to participate. One-on-one, there's depth available. You can take a conversation from the weather to your actual life in 20 minutes. And that, for a quiet person, is when energy starts to return instead of drain. It's not about being afraid of groups. It's about what a conversation has to be worth to make it feel right. Because, and this is the part that doesn't get said enough, for people who don't talk a lot, conversation is not free. It costs something, not in a traumatic way, not always. But in the same way that going to a loud concert costs something even if you loved every second of it. Quiet people feel that cost earlier and more acutely than most, which is why they conserve, why they wait, why they'll sit through an entire party saying very little, and then, on the drive home alone, have the most vivid, alive conversation of their entire week. With themselves, being misread as cold or distant when you are actually deeply, observantly, almost painfully present. That's its own quiet kind of loneliness. It doesn't announce itself. It rarely gets named. But something accumulates over years of being told you're too quiet, asked if you're okay when you're fine, left out of conversations because someone decided you weren't engaged. When the truth is, you were the most tuned-in person in the room. If you've ever been completely present somewhere and still being treated like you weren't really there, you know exactly what this feels like. You were present. You just weren't performing it. The silence, to be clear, is not a performance of depth. It's not a pose. Some quiet people are profoundly shallow, and some of the most genuinely complex people you'll ever meet can't stop talking. But the silence that comes from this kind of inner architecture, from processing fully before speaking, from listening completely rather than partially, from needing a conversation to be worth what it costs, that silence is not absence. It's a different relationship with expression. They're not withholding. They're just not performing the presence they already have. They are not broken. They are not superior. They are not waiting to be unlocked by the right extrovert with enough patience. They are fully themselves in a way that mostly lives on the inside. And the world, which rewards loudness and punishes stillness, makes them pay quietly for that difference every single day. There's something the quietest people in a room often carry that never gets named. A kind of fluency with their own interior, an ease with silence that most people never develop because they've always outrun it. And in a world that treats noise as evidence of life, that capacity can look like absence when it is, in fact, the whole point. So, next time you're at that dinner party and there's someone at the end of the table who hasn't said much, before you lean over and ask if they're okay, maybe just let them be there. Let the silence be what it is. Because the quiet person at that table, the one nobody has quite noticed all evening, they've already seen more about the room than anyone else. They've been thinking, really thinking, this entire time. They just haven't needed to say it out loud. Is there someone like that in your life? Do you think you've ever actually known what was going on inside them?